Welcome back, everyone. Here again with Dr. Dean, and today we were going to talk about magnesium status, stress, and this vicious cycle where it goes around and around. What's going on, Doctor? How you doing?
It's great to be back, Kurt. I think we've got a few fans now of us hooking up together, so it's a pleasure to try and get this in regularly and get some good education out.
Yeah, our plan is to do this weekly if we can.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we were going to go with magnesium today, which is kind of an interesting topic. I know I've always been of the belief that it was very important to supplement with, but I think you kind of changed my mind more recently into how extremely important it is in the sheer quantity that we really need.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we only looked at your blood panel was perfect, absolutely immaculate, and then there was one thing that I spotted in terms of a correlation, and that was the alkaline phosphatase ALP in your liver enzymes, which we're always conditioned to sort of believe that the lower the better when it comes to our sort of liver enzyme capacity. But alkaline phosphatase, whilst it is listed in the liver panel, the liver function test, it's not a liver enzyme to speak. It's on all of our cells, and it basically shuttles phosphate ions in and out of our cells to create ATP in the mitochondria. So we know from looking at both epidemiological studies and also clinical trials of testing the theory that when the ALP value is below 70 international units, it's shown that there's not enough magnesium in the system, because at its core, ALP has a magnesium ion sitting in the middle of the enzyme. So when we have ALP less than 70, you're not making enough ALP. So therefore, your phosphate metabolism, your phosphate transfer is probably having to compensate to a level that we could probably increase the expression of that enzyme by putting more magnesium into the system.
And this is contrary to the other markers, even showing that your magnesium level is fine, right? The traditional ones that doctors are looking
at. So like your red blood cells. I guess the other thing to really talk about here as well with blood work is when we are measuring metal ions like magnesium, serum magnesium and blood work, that is how much magnesium is in that serum. So it becomes a paradox that you could have high magnesium in your serum blood, but very little magnesium inside your tissue or cells. And that's where it's important as an extra marker, like what you spoke about there. The red blood cell magnesium content tends to be a very easy cell that we can check magnesium status of to see how well is magnesium being transported inside the red blood cell surrounding hemoglobin and iron transfer. That if we have low serum magnesium, it doesn't necessarily mean you're deficient. It just means that potentially you're storing it in tissue as opposed to it being in your serum. So checking metal status of bloods, even like heavy metals, doesn't really always tell us the bigger picture because it can be inside our tissue as opposed to inside your blood. Exactly, iron, ferritin, you have ferroportin, you have transfer, and you have all these transport enzymes of iron itself as well. We don't check half of them. I guess peroxidase, which is doing, the transfer of Fe3 plus to Fe2 plus, so that our cells can take the iron. We don't really go into that level of detail when we're looking at blood, so we're taking it at face value of what's on the serum is what's correct, and it doesn't really tell us that bigger picture. So ALP is a really nice marker that we can assess someone's magnesium status because of how much expression is going on with that enzyme. And so from what we've seen in that paper, it tends to come out at about 8 to 10 milligrams per kilogram is sort of your optimal magnesium intake to get you to that ALP level of about 70 to 80. But from that paper, which is over here in the screen, so if anyone wants to check it out that we're going to discuss, it's Magnesium Status and Stress, the Vicious Cycle Concept Revisited.
If you share it, I can put it up.
Yeah, well, let's do it. Let's share it on the screen. Let me see. So this is us. So for anyone that wants to check it, that's the DOI there. So it's from the journal Nutrients from 2020. Very, very interesting paper. And I think the easiest way, without going through all of it, is basically this nice graphical abstract that basically shows us that there's a vicious cycle where we end up in a magnesium deficient environment. So whether that is, again, urinary excretion, not taking in enough magnesium, stress, increased catecholamines, cortisol, all of this is going to lead to potentially a low magnesium environment. So then it makes us susceptible to, I guess, excitotoxicity in our brain. So in terms of like the NMDA receptor being activated, triggering off again potential stress catecholamines, and furthermore just drives this vicious circle. Now, the other side of it is when we put more magnesium into the system, our ability to adapt to what's sort of called allostatic stress and how the body adapts itself to daily environmental load of stress, you end up driving potentially a higher need for more magnesium because of this circle. So you adapt to more stress, so you need more magnesium, and it just becomes a vicious cycle. So when it comes to, I guess, looking at some of the symptoms for magnesium deficiency, some of the very easy ones are fatigue and irritability. And this all plays off the fact that our catecholamines, our dopamine, our adrenaline all get impacted because another enzyme in the body, COMT, catechol O-methyltransferase, which helps break down our dopamine, relies on magnesium.
It's a cofactor, correct?
Correct, yeah. So if we don't have enough magnesium, the cofactor that facilitates methylation of our neurotransmitters slows right down. COMT gets overwhelmed by excessive estrogen. It gets slowed down by higher androgen loads. And so if COMT slows down, your dopamine level rises.
Yep.
And generally that's what triggers off anxiety, is that you've got too much dopamine, leading to a knock-on effect to noradrenaline and adrenaline. So eventually you have this nervous energy that you can't dissipate, and that's what triggers off those anxiety feelings. So one of the easiest things to stabilize mood when it comes to androgens would be magnesium intake, on top of obviously the nutritional cores of tryptophan and tyrosine to build dopamine and serotonin. The magnesium requirement for someone who's taken androgens, it's probably going to be a little bit higher than 8 to 10 milligrams per kilogram of what would be the RDA for a normal individual to speak. And so the paper, again, not to go into all of it, but it'll have, the signs and symptoms. So again, there's irritability and anger, more so triggered by stress, but it's also very similar towards magnesium deficiency. So when someone is chronically stressed, magnesium goes down, they're more than likely magnesium deficient. So even when they remove a level of that environmental stress, the negative thought patterns that arise from stress, they think is linked to low magnesium. So again, when you're taking androgens, some guys fall into an almost OCD pattern of negative thinking, or I'm not going to say paranoia, but we do know androgens, through their effects on the dopamine receptors, can trigger off a level of paranoia, schizophrenia. That some of that comes back again to COMT and magnesium intake. So at its core, a lot of mood disbalance that potentially comes with androgen use falls back onto magnesium.
Yeah. Well, you and I started, when we started discussing this a few videos back, we were talking about trenbolone use and how magnesium would alleviate some of those symptoms, especially at night. And that's what really kind of sparked my interest in this, because it's a common question, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the whole like transomnia aspect of not being able to sleep, this really stems from any androgen, but because we know how strong of an androgen towards the androgen receptor trenbolone has, if it is acting to slow COMT down, which is one of the things that androgens do, you're going to have higher levels of dopamine. So at nighttime, you're going to be physically tired, but you're going to be mentally wired. So,
and the opposite of normal. It's supposed to be serotonin that would be high at night.
Exactly. So serotonin makes us lazy, makes us content at nighttime to fall into light sleep. I guess, again, the rumination aspect, the negative thought processes, the paranoia, all linked to magnesium deficiency. Now, if we can get COMT in a position where it is running at an optimal rate to clear out dopamine, your brain becomes a lot more relaxed. Your thought processes, so thought chasing of lying in bed thinking, what if this and then this and that, and especially someone in sort of a contest prep scenario of, what if I don't peak properly? What if I've still got 2 or 3 pounds of fat to lose? All these what ifs at nighttime. Magnesium helping to support that neurotransmitter balance clearance, getting into a more optimal, I guess, parasympathetic nervous system state, serves towards sleep. So obviously sleep's huge for recovery. If we can sleep optimally with bodybuilding prep, then we're going to have more physical and mental energy the next day to execute tasks, more fat loss. I guess, what's up on the screen is very interesting that the RDA for magnesium sits for all populations at about 300 to 400 milligrams per day. And that's based on the fact that of that, about 25 to 30% will be yielded through intestinal absorption, and you lose about 25 to 30% being excreted in your kidneys. So when you really look at, when you put your magnesium intake, say at 8 to 10 milligrams per kilogram, so for 220-pound bodybuilder or 100-kilo male, we're looking at about 1,000 milligrams of elemental magnesium per day. You're only absorbing about 25% of that. So really about 250, 300 milligrams of that magnesium is actually what's going into the system. So you can see why excessively high magnesium intakes on the surface look way beyond what's there from an RDA perspective. But when you look at how much comes out in the feces, how much comes out through the urine, it really does warrant that these really high intakes are sort of steadily applied towards, a bodybuilder across 24-hour periods.
Yeah. So I was going to back up a little bit, and we can discuss briefly. So our ancestors clearly had more magnesium intake than we did, right? It was just the soil was better. It was found in what we were eating versus the processed things we're eating now. And their level of stress was probably more acute, but it's not as prolonged as what we see now, right? Like a lion attacking you, but then it's gone.
Yeah. I mean, even from a food perspective, when people are like, well, I take in enough magnesium. When you actually look at how much magnesium is in sort of vegetables, to speak, is going to be your main source, or a level of some grains and seeds. But off the top of my head, one medium avocado has about 50 to 60 milligrams of magnesium. 100 grams of spinach, dry weight spinach, so they were talking like a big bag of spinach before it's even cooked, has about 88 milligrams of magnesium. I think an ounce of almonds or cashews is about 40 to 50 milligrams. So if you're like RDA, as to speak, is being set at 10 milligrams per kilogram at 1,000 milligrams of magnesium, that's a lot of spinach, a lot of nuts, a lot of foods that, in terms of food volume, you need a lot to hit that RDA of magnesium because of that deficiency in the food of itself. That it's a clear winner when it comes to supplementation. What is sort of a core mineral supplement that, aside from obviously like what we discussed in the last podcast, potassium, iodine, selenium, magnesium is way up there as being a really important one overall towards what it does in the body.
Yeah. And we take, modern humans do things that also cause magnesium depletion as well, faster, right? Like I believe coffee can cause it to be depleted. Not caffeinated. Sparkling drinks, carbonated drinks will cause depletion of magnesium. So if you drink soda or seltzer, right? You'll lose more magnesium than you would otherwise. You mentioned elemental magnesium, but the form that we take as a supplement is typically chelated. It's bound to something else
Correct.
that helps absorption. What do you say, in your opinion, is the best form to take? I have an idea, but
In my view, probably magnesium bisglycinate because of the two glycines that are attached. And to be honest, people often ask me in the past, you have magnesium oxide, magnesium citrate, you have magnesium threonate, magnesium bisglycinate. You have all these chelated magnesium forms. It's not necessarily one is better than the other. So from a chemist's perspective, we have to look at the percentage weight of that chelate, of how much magnesium is present versus the other anion that's balancing out the magnesium. So magnesium oxide, off the top of my head, is 60% molecular weight magnesium to oxygen, whereas magnesium bisglycinate is 11% elemental weight magnesium versus the two glycines.
Yeah. With that form, though, sorry to interrupt, you would benefit from the glycine as well, though, correct?
Exactly. So this is where then when we look at what do the chelates offer in terms of magnesium citrate is providing a source of citrate that can feed into the citric acid cycle. Magnesium oxide, because of its high percentage of magnesium, is rapidly absorbed. But the problem here is when it's rapidly absorbed by the enterocytes and the gut absorption, and it triggers diarrhea. And that's why it's used as a laxative. And any place that has a high amount of magnesium oxide as a form of magnesium supplementation. So if we're looking at sort of multivitamins, potentially immune supplements, magnesium oxide there to provide, a very small dose of magnesium, maybe 20, 30 milligrams of magnesium is okay because of it being a high percentage of magnesium. But when you start giving someone like 200, 250 milligrams of magnesium oxide, then you're starting to run into problems because there's a high amount of magnesium load going in one go that the enterocytes will literally tell the intestinal cells to absorb water. So it's an osmolyte, and that just flushes the bowel. So you end up with peristaltic action. Whereas, like what you said with magnesium bisglycinate, it's a magnesium ion with two glycines attached to it. Now you've got a level of magnesium going into the system, but also now two glycines that act as potentially neurotransmitters through glycine receptors in your brain. And obviously, glycine receptors attenuate GABA, and GABA helps the brain calm down. So from a perspective of having an overall neurotransmitter effect and balance, magnesium bisglycinate tends to be the one that I prefer. But when you look at the percentage of magnesium, it's only 10, 11%. So you're looking at a lot of capsules of magnesium bisglycinate to get you up to, maybe 800 milligrams of supplemental magnesium.
Yeah. So for the audience listening, since we tend to look at anabolic steroids, it would be like looking at like the ester for testosterone. So biglycinate would be like, a much longer ester, like a decanoate, or, something similar to that, or, cypionate versus, oxide would be something like propionate, something very short, where you're getting much more of the actual product.
Correct. Exactly. Yeah.
So dosing timing wise, I noticed as well. So you can't take, even with, I use the biglycinate as well. Even with that form though, you can't take a large bolus dose at once because it'll still upset your stomach, right? So you
pretty
have
much
to divide the dose up throughout the day with food. And
I think from a safe perspective, and not even like a safe perspective of not flushing your bowels, probably somewhere around 300 milligrams elemental in one go from magnesium bisglycinate. It's probably going to be more tolerated than 300 milligrams of elemental magnesium from magnesium oxide. So again, we have to view how easy is the chelate being absorbed across the intestinal mucosa for magnesium bisglycinate. Because it's an amino acid chelate as opposed to being an inorganic, I guess, chelate. The dissociation of the metal from the amino acid is a little slower than the dissociation from an anion from oxide, basically. So with that, then you would probably benefit from dosing magnesium steadily throughout the day. Again, it comes down to food choices. So if you've got meals like what we talked about with like spinach, avocado, almonds, kale, I guess any sort of the green leafy veg have a level of magnesium, then you might not need to supplement at that meal. But on the other side, you could probably add a small amount to, again, top up what the food is ingesting. And then obviously looking at that overall total daily goal. But I wouldn't advise, if you are very magnesium deficient, where it's just like chicken and rice all day, that before bed thinking, oh crap, I have to get my magnesium intake in, that you're going to pop like 10 or 12 capsules of magnesium bisglycinate before bed. You will more than likely wake up at 2, 3 in the morning with a very loose bowel.
Yeah. So, and for most people listening, they probably are eating more similarly to chicken and rice than they are avocados and leafy greens. So we just split up the dosing throughout the day. It's a much more sane way to do that.
Yeah. And I mean, then you can look at, we talked about in the last podcast, that was why, like, the electrolyte product that I formulated with Supplement Needs has 145 milligrams of magnesium from a very cool magnesium molecule, magnesium taurate. Magnesium taurate, because it's attached to a taurine, helps to hydrate cardiac tissue, cardiac muscle cells. So it's a really cool way of getting magnesium, but also getting taurine, because we know the beneficial effects supplementing with taurine has. And that was my sort of way of adding a good form of taurine and magnesium into an electrolyte to, again, drinking it during the day, you're getting your magnesium intake in, and you're also hydrating your body with the high potassium. So you sort of look at, with supplements, what's the sort of best way that this is going to incorporate on top of the nutrition, than being some like fad product like what we've seen about sea salt or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Can we talk about taurine for a second? Perhaps I'm wrong. I was always under the assumption that supplemental taurine didn't do anything unless if you had renal insufficiency. I know that cats don't produce any taurine, but humans produce supposedly an adequate amount of taurine.
Yeah,
right? But
they do.
It's not ideal, though. Is it?
No, well, I guess in terms of how we look at the kinetics of how, when magnesium is attached to taurine, where the magnesium actually gets transported to, there's some really nice studies showing the shuttling of that magnesium taurine into cardiac myocytes. So again, with taurine, because it's a very important part of bile, again, it's what TUDCA is, it's taurine ursodeoxylic acid. We make enough taurine in order to produce enough bile acid. So when it comes to supplementing with taurine, again, the only scenario that you may need it is if you're using clenbuterol, like what we talked about in the first podcast, because of excessive involuntary muscle shakings going to deplete intracellular taurine, which is one of the potential mechanisms of where they see cramping with clenbuterol use, because of we have depletion of taurine levels within the liver.
Okay,
but
so I was wrong.
Like what you said, in terms of like, does it need to be classically supplemented with? We get more than enough through our nutrition.
Okay, I was taught with beta 2 agonists, and now I'm looking at clenbuterol in a different light, that it was more of almost like a flipping of the sodium potassium pump that was causing the cramping, and not a taurine depletion. I'm guessing I was wrong about that as well.
I've seen a paper surrounding the depletion of liver taurine that I will send on to.
Yeah, I would love to see that.
I'm fairly certain I've read this in the past, and that was one what you are saying with the cramping is correct, again, with the sodium potassium pump, and that's why, again, your electrolyte balance is so important. But the taurine depletion, I'm more than 100% sure I've read that there's depletion of taurine from the liver with clenbuterol, but I will check. I could be wrong. I could be really cool. Yeah.
I just gave someone advice yesterday on it, and I said it wasn't taurine and it was sodium potassium, the electrolyte balance being off. But the taurine thing must have come from somewhere, right? This has been the bodybuilding thing for a long time, to supplement with taurine with clenbuterol. It was just not how I was taught about these agonists. But it's very possible that I'm wrong, right? We learn every day.
We do. I mean, this is, where I'm fairly certain I've read this from a paper and I cited it on a forum before. So I will, I
We could
will, I
always do
will
a
go
second
searching
video
for it.
on. Yeah, we could
And
do a
then,
video just on taurine too. That could be interesting.
with most definitely, yeah.
Right, because the excretion in a normal healthy subject, right? The excretion minus the beta 2 agonist should match the intake, right? Like
Intake,
your body's going
pretty
to, if you've
much.
taken 5 grams of taurine, you're most likely going to excrete an extra 5 grams of taurine, is my understanding, outside of renal insufficiency, I guess.
Pretty much. One of the best ways, we're sort of getting off on a tangent, if you want to induce a bowel movement in someone in the morning time, is 2 to 3 grams of taurine with 2 to 3 grams of glycine. And it helps to stimulate output of bile from the gallbladder. And obviously, as soon as bile enters into the small intestine, it triggers off peristaltic motion. So one of the things that you can do in the morning time if you want to induce a mass movement alongside hydration is 3 grams of taurine, 3 grams of glycine, some fluid and electrolytes, and pretty much within 30 minutes, you should have a mass movement.
That's neat. The glycine as well should do something with the nervous system as well to
It
stimulate
would.
that response, right?
It would, but it's also part of bile acid secretion as well. So we all know that as soon as bile is released from the gallbladder, it sets off that chain of pushing things along. So it's a very interesting cascade.
Yeah, no, that's really neat. I never thought about it in that way. What so what would you say the magnesium deficiency in first world countries fairly high, right? Most people.
Pretty much, even your average person, if they, I'd say most people would fail to hit 360 to 400 milligrams of magnesium through diet. But like, this is just your gen pop regular person who might go to the gym. Then you start adding in daily stress, high impact sort of careers, family life, interpersonal conflicts, and then you start adding in the milieu of messing with your neurotransmitter balance with someone taking androgens. You see how this slowly creeps up to this escalating point of being a mineral that most people need to really seriously reevaluate.
Yeah, and like you said previously, if you're using androgens, as the load goes up, the magnesium need would also go up.
Absolutely,
most
and it's
not supplementing with it appropriately.
And anyone that's listening, if they have ever suffered with like transomnia, if you've never tried this, literally the next time you do a prep and you are utilizing trenbolone, look at magnesium bisglycinate intake before bed and see how your sleep architecture completely changes. Like, I remember when I really took the mechanics of sleep and the biochemistry of sleep seriously as sort of my very first foray into supplement formulation, to improve my own sleep when I was an engineer, when I was a shift engineer, competing and having to work day shift, night shift, and figure out how I could support my sleep. It became quite clear that wired but tired, especially after like night shift, when your circadian rhythm is sort of telling you it's time to be awake, not go to sleep, rather than fall into the trap of like using phenyl GABA or phenibut to just basically knock yourself out. Understanding how to get that brain chemistry aligned of, yes, your circadian pattern is trying to bring you into a more wakefulness state because it's now morning time. But if I can put my brain chemistry into a lower dopamine, higher serotonin environment, create a sleep environment in terms like blackout blinds, sleep masks, silicone earplugs, literally mimic nighttime, my brain chemistry set me up to fall into a sleep cycle, as opposed to hit or miss, getting home from night shift, getting into bed and hoping that you're going to go to sleep against your circadian biology. The magnesium intake, then the COMT, getting dopamine down. My sleep between day shift and night shift was a mirror. So I'd go to bed at 9 p.m. for day shifts and I'd go to bed at 9 a.m. on night shifts, and I'd sleep the same length of time to 4:30 a.m. or 4:30 p.m. it didn't really matter what time I went to bed at, provided I got that sort of underlying neurochemistry under control of low dopamine, high serotonin, a relaxed nervous system, sleep environment. Huge difference to like doing a bodybuilding prep when you're having to sleep during the day. And I mean, all the years that I competed, I was working shifts. I was working a month of day shifts, a month of night shifts. And it was never an excuse season to season of, oh, well, I've been working shifts, so my condition's off. Literally, the recovery capability between shifts on days versus nights was the exact same.
Yeah, which is rare. And they could be put to use by other shift workers, policemen, firemen, you know, hospital workers,
Absolutely.
doctors, anyone who's working odd shifts, right? And rotates like that.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I first started night shifts, the information you're given from an occupational health perspective is sort of like, yeah, have your normal dinner and then go to bed when you come in from your night shift. And it was just backwards that eventually I was like, right, what is the actual biochemistry of how we fall asleep? And that was like high serotonin, low dopamine, zinc, GABA, and then obviously sleep environment. As soon as I figured that puzzle out, bodybuilding preps, it didn't matter, like I said, whether it was day shift, night shift. My sleep was the exact same, 7 to 8 hours, same quality tracked on like Nora Ring. My fat loss never slowed down. There was never a point where I hit a plateau. It was really just as simple as like an aha moment of, yep, COMT is the guy that's causing all the issues of. When I looked back at like maybe in my early 20s when I first started competing, of like, you'd fall asleep, but then after 2 hours you wake up and you're wide awake. And that is that cascade of you've gotten into your sleep stages. At some point, there's been a blood sugar imbalance, or there's been something in the environment that's made your brain not feel safe, and you've woken up. You're now in an awakened state, and all of a sudden dopamine starts firing off, and now all of a sudden you're starting to actively, consciously think of one thought to the next, and you're actually being pulled out of sleep, and before you know it, you're just lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, going, "Okay, I have to get up in 5 hours for work. What do I do now?"
Yeah, unfortunately, we've probably all been there many times. But I was going to say, for the audience, if they want to comment below as to other topics that we could cover related to this, that would be really helpful.
Absolutely. I know we've got, from this, we'll have a look at taurine, and I'm going to try and pull up that paper now in a few minutes.
PPAR would be interesting.
PPARs was an interesting one of, someone asked us surrounding like the last podcast. A very interesting question was surrounding like telmisartan's use as a potential PED because it's a PPAR. But my straight up answer is, then why don't you just take pliaglitazone or rosiglitazone? Take an actual PPAR if that's what you are seeking.
PPAR might even be farce for the trees, though, at that point. Like, I'm not sure what difference it's really going to make to mess with that specifically. But we can explore that. You know,
one of the things that I guess PPARs have, I guess, a good sounding pharmacology use towards is elevated lipid metabolism in order for someone to utilize fatty acids more efficiently. So if they have
insulin resistance,
insulin resistance, skewed triglycerides, then we might use this PPAR to effectively make the system more efficient at fatty acid utilization. But I guess, do you need, if there's optimal health, if you've got good insulin sensitivity, if you're doing all the right things, what real benefit does a PPAR have to a normal average bodybuilder that doesn't have insulin resistance, has pretty good utilization of fatty acids, because that's pretty much what their mitochondria uses at rest? I guess it's a really good selling point towards something that, like I said, is an abstract mechanism.
Yeah, like selling telmisartan as a prophylactic drug.
Pretty much. I mean,
I think we can explore, because I think it's an interesting avenue and gene that most people don't understand, right? Because the knockout mice show, completely different fat storage patterns, and
They do, and we always zoom in on just gamma. So PPAR resorts to like the gamma receptor of proliferosome peroxidase agonist receptor. I always get that mixed up with what PPAR is when you try and say it out loud. But you've got alpha, beta, gamma, and delta, and we always zoom in on gamma. So and the others do have interesting things also to them. It's just that we know that gamma is pretty much expressed on most skeletal muscle cells, which is where we want to utilize triglycerides for energy. So it's a great topic that we can delve into, because it's one of those ones from a longevity perspective that seems to come in circles of people are all for the rage of taking GLP agonists as longevity medication. And then the other adjuvant to it is something like pioglitazone or rosiglitazone, one of the PPARs alongside it.
Very cool. Well, thank you, Dr. Dean. We'll touch base again next week about, PPARs or whatever the chosen topic here that's selected.
Absolutely. Pleasure as always.
Yeah, thank you. I'll put your links down below, and thank you again.